Oh my goodness, I don't know whether to share this.
I hate this for Australia, but I love this story.
I promise you, I will never buy you a whisk. Is that
Thank
better?
you, that's so much better. Oh, can I have some of the Andrex puppy? When I was a child, and I used to go to my grandma's house, I used to roll the toilet roll all over the house and the bathroom. And my grandparents were like, "What's happened, Georgia?" And I'd be like, "The Andrex puppy did it." I sometimes occasionally would do it even as a teenager, just to like,
Oh my God.
just like as a throwback. Didn't they change the name of it?
From Andrex, when they got rid of puppies on a roll.
Wait, what's puppies?
Puppies on a roll is what the whole brand of Andrex, the Labrador puppies, became such a strong thing for them. They just called it puppies on a roll. I'm sure that was a thing.
And maybe they changed it back because no one cottoned onto that.
Oh my God.
Is that why?
I could knit with toilet paper. Why have I not thought about that before? I wonder what that
Because
would
that's
happen
a
when you do that.
terrible material choice that has no sustainability for the...
Yeah, but I've had the thought now, so it's a bit dangerous. Is that an appropriate segue into our next episode?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that wasn't the usual introduction. You're used to probably getting like, hello and welcome to Yarn Library Podcast with me, Adam Cleveley.
And me, Georgia Denham, at Tulipel on Instagram.
We should do that more often. That was fun. Why are we talking about Andrex puppies? So
Because I handed you.
I think my grandma one day, she sat me down and went, "The Andrex puppy's not going to come anymore, is she?"
Your poor grandmother. Just spend days after every visit that George
It was
has
my
been.
granddad mostly. He'd just be there, and they thought it was adorable, but they would be there like rolling, and they say that all the rolls.
You think they thought it was adorable?
No, they loved it. They loved it. But there'd be these like wonky rolls, and they're quite particular people. I mean, neurodivergence does run in families, and so they would be really like, I think, agitated by having these wonky rolls that they just had to read.
I mean, like, neurodivergence and which way round toilet rolls hang is a big deal. I think re-rolled toilet rolls is
Okay. So this is weirdly segueing into one of the things I wanted to talk about.
Well, let's go for it. Let's see if we can go straight from a tangent with no context whatsoever back onto a main theme.
Okay, so intentional choices. When we're talking about sustainability and craft, we talked last week about how it's a hodgepodge, a variability, lots of different choices. We have a lack of concrete information oftentimes in handcrafts. And I also said that it can be like the perfect place to dive into these more sustainable considerations. And I think hand in hand with that, it can also just promote a general mindset of like making intentional choices that I think really, really links in with sustainability. If you knit things or you crochet things and you see how long it can take to make something by hand or machine, I think you get a sense of slowing down that's really can be beneficial when you're making other choices. It can bring a kind of intention. So like you say, that craft can have a benefit for your mental health. It can have a benefit for your physical well-being. There's so many different things about it that are positive. And I really think that part of this sustainability conversation is also the mindset that being a crafter brings when you're making something. And the reason that this sort of segued was because I have this concept that I think of where I look for forever items. Like when you think of dogs wanting a forever home, right? Andrex puppies. Mm-hmm. And when you mentioned about like toilet roll and which way you hang it, I mean, this is a story I was going to bring anyway. It reminded me of someone I used to live with. And this comes into the forever item situation. This particular person had a very particular way of hanging toilet roll that they insisted was the way that we needed to do it. And when we didn't do it, it kind of annoyed her. She would hang the roll with the tail facing the wall.
I knew you were going to say that. I could see it on your
wait.
face. The tension in your face. Like I knew it was so upsetting, and obviously there is only one way to hang it, and the way you've just described it is wrong.
Yeah,
but how are you going to make it worse?
So then she would also pull it all the way down, almost to the floor.
What?
As a courtesy to the next user, so there was a piece there ready for them to rip off.
I'm so disgusted.
I know, exactly. So that paints the scene. Now you know what kind of a person this was. A brute.
I'm worried that they're going to write in and complain at how dare you mention me.
I have not spoken to this person in years. I am happy to burn bridges.
With this absolute monster of a person.
I almost feel like I must have shared this story at a Rogue Yarn Club. So you might have heard this, but I am happy at this point to go on record with this story because I think it's the right time. I will obviously not name names. That's not what we do here. But I would like to tell the tale of my forever whisk. So during the pandemic, I was locked down in my flat in Birmingham. It was a dingy, mouldy one, but the rent was cheap. I graduated bang into the pandemic. So I was a 2020 graduate and I was on universal credit for a bit. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I eventually got like a part-time job in a supermarket. And that was a whole other, I don't know, tail and can of worms. But life is generally not great. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've always been a person of intentional choices, particularly in that time. I didn't have a lot of money, but I was still very much determined. I was always raised with this idea of like, you buy something once, you buy the best that you can afford. It's funny because one of the things that my family are very particular about is kitchen things and cutlery and like crockery and stuff. I thought that was because, well, A, because everyone was like that, and B, because we were in Sheffield and my parents worked in the steel cutlery industry.
Yep.
My dad paints spoons for cutlery for electroplating, very much a craft. So the fact that my dad knows lots about his spoon preferences and his knife fork preferences, I thought that was just normal. Mm-hmm. Perhaps it was speaking a little bit to the genetic neurodivergence of our family, just a touch. When it comes to kitchenwares, very intentional. I took a year out to work and save up before uni, and my dad and I, we spent a year getting my kitchen things. And many of them I still have and use every day. It was like a nice, fun daddy-daughter project that I did during that year out. And sometimes I'd meet him after work and we'd go around TK Maxx and I'd pick pots with rivets without spot welding. All very, very intentional. There was one item there that I could not figure out. I couldn't find my Forever whisk.
Right.
The elusive Forever whisk. This had continued, I mean, since I'd been looking for when I was 18.
Like a balloon whisk.
Yeah, like a hand mixie, any kind of whisk, right?
Well, you can't say any kind of whisk.
I know.
There are
there
so
is
many different kinds of whisk.
Exactly. I wanted to pinpoint the type of whisk that would serve my needs, that would be easily cleanable. One of my big issues with a lot of whisks when there's like a balloon whisk is that there are little holes in the connection between the handle and the metal
balloon
where little bits of dirt or like muck, food residue could get into the handle and then you can't get in it to clean it. Mm-hmm. So you either need a really like solid seal there, or I've got parameters. I'd had these parameters very carefully for a long time.
Meanwhile, you've not been able to whisk anything.
Well, I would figure it out. I'd use a fork or I'd borrow a whisk from a friend. Generally, there was a whisk for me to use, but I didn't have a personal whisk that was my own whisk because I still had not found that elusive dream whisk. Mm-hmm. And every time I went to a cook shop, I would look at whisks. This is so neurodivergent. Like, how did they not know? How did they not know? If I went to a different country, I would be like, maybe they have different brands of whisk here. Mm-hmm. And I could never bloody find the whisk that I wanted.
Did you find your whisk?
Well, bear with. So I live with this toilet roll girl.
Uh-huh.
And one of the whisks that we were using during the pandemic when I didn't have a lot of money, it was a crappy whisk that had come from somewhere, not purchased. It just sort of came with the flat. It was one of these weird things that just hovers around. Spot welded. The handle broke off it. And I was like, I don't want to buy another whisk. We're in a pandemic. I can't look at things. I can't make the choice. We'll just keep using this whisk. And so I just had to hold it by the bits of metal that were sort of sticking out. So it was slightly uncomfortable, but I made it work, right?
Yeah.
Just held it. This girl was like, she'd sort of come into the kitchen. She'd go, looks like you need a whisk. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet. But I've been thinking about a whisk for several years now, actually. And I really don't want a whisk.
She was offering to buy you one.
Well, because we were in pandemic, we were all locked down. We were all going to be together for Christmas. So she sort of said, maybe I'll get you one for Christmas. And I was like, oh, that's really sweet, but please don't. I explicitly told her twice, please don't buy me a whisk. Come around Christmas Day, I get this oddly shaped package. Birmingham had been called into the second highest tier of lockdown. So I'd not been able to go home to my family, but her family lived locally, so she could see them. And I was in a bad emotional state. And then I opened this present. She's got me this bloody whisk from one of the high street shops that's sort of like IKEA, where you walk around it and they sell everything for a good round number. It was all of the things I didn't want in a whisk. She was just like smugly sort of sat there with one eyebrow raised. And I'd like to think it came from a good place, but really I think it came from I want to prove you wrong and I'm going to buy you a whisk. even though you've asked me not to buy you a whisk 2 or 3 times.
And now you're carefully nurturing the whisk because it's your forever whisk?
No, it broke. It broke about 6 months later. I'm saying this all a bit kind of tongue in cheek, but it started the concept for me of like the forever whisk, of like sometimes there are things in life where you could say, oh, this is really not important, and just buy a bloody whisk.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm seeing that look in your eyes, okay? But for me, that was years that I learned all about whisks, and I knew what I wanted from a whisk. I can't even tell you how many reviews I've read about whisks. So that's my forever whisk story. You know, you could have a forever whisk version of that story in any kind of way. You could be listening to this and going like, this is dripping with privilege, and to some people it wouldn't be important, but it was so important to me that I was not going to have a whisk that was going to break and that I wouldn't want to replace in the future, because I wanted to make that one decision that it was going to be something that would last. And I feel like that is a really important conversation with sustainability, is making those intentional choices. I'm not trying to say that in a, well, look at how high and mighty I am because I spent 6 years, 7 years trying to buy my whisk. I don't mean it in that sense, but I think there are different approaches to this. And the approach of my friend was like, I'll just buy her a whisk and that will be fine.
I mean, to play devil's advocate, like the amount of wasted brain time and so on. I know that's your counter to it, but
it was
like,
comforting.
a lot of people listening would say that's a complete waste of time. Just buy a whisk and stop thinking about it.
Yeah, but
and that's also metal. I would also argue that if you bought something that's metal, it's 100% recyclable. So it's not, it's not as.
But then the environmental impact of it needing to be melted down and all that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
And how much recycled metal is actually going back into the things. I'm of steel stock. You can't throw around metal recycling near me and not expect some fact checking.
I don't know what metal it was going to be made of. So
yeah. I totally get you. And you could say it's just wasted thoughts. And I'm not forever whisk about everything, but it was something that brought me joy, the idea of getting something that usefully would work for me forever and would take into account like my future needs and different stages of my life. And that's been a really nice thing for me with my kitchen wares. And I still use many of the same things that I went to university with. And you can all, I don't know, we're talking about sustainability and I'm trying to give you ways of jumping in here, but you are just so disgusted with me. I can see it.
I just don't know where to go. We've got a list of like 20 topics that we didn't cover in the previous episode.
And now I've talked about it. There's a 20 minutes. I'm sorry.
We ceramics. Are actually genuinely coming up on 20 minutes of the recording. That's like all we've managed. Like we agreed that the first thing we were going to talk about in this episode was superwash wool. And 20 minutes into recording is my opportunity to jump in. And I promise you, I am trying to think about how to connect a whisk with superwash yarn.
I was going to briefly tell my whisk story, and then we were going to talk about the impact of ceramics and making intentional choices, and then you were going to talk about superwash. And I'm sorry that I don't know. I'm sorry.
Where would you like to go, Georgia? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I know that I've been talking for a while, but I will read this out so that it's just done with quickly, and then we can move on to superwash.
Are we still talking about the whisk?
No.
Okay.
No, I'll never talk about the whisk ever again. I'm now clear that you do not want to hear about my whisk.
I'm going to after we finish, Georgia, I'm going to take you over to my cutlery drawer, and I'm going to. I'm
so interested, actually.
Cooking equipment drawer, and I'll show you
kitchen.
how. Like, some of them, I've got some things. I've got a saucepan that is. I must have used it for 25 years. It was definitely around when I was a student.
Yeah.
But it wasn't made as an intentional choice. It's made well enough, and it's stainless steel that it just lasts.
Sometimes those things accidentally end up being the things that stick around. So ceramics. This was going to pivot nicely into when you can make intentional choices about things. Sometimes that intentional choice could offset a larger environmental impact of an item. So when it comes to ceramics, your instincts might be saying like, oh, local ceramics maker, local potter, I'll go to them. That will be like so much more sustainable and earthy and crafty and blah. And actually the environmental impact of small scale ceramic pottery studios really, really high impact relative to commercial buying something, it being imported, mass produced from a different country. For example, like if something was mass produced in China and you went to a supermarket and you wanted to buy a bowl or a mug, the environmental impact, the life cycle analysis of that item would be far less coming from China from mass production than if you go down the road to your local ceramic artist maker and buy a mug from them. There's a paper I'm going to link to by Giorgio Solani. I saw him give a presentation on this at a craft conference last year, and it was really, really fascinating. Actually, just talking about all of these challenges that the ceramic arts kind of really struggle with. Slow technological development and material development for something that is like a relatively small, like not a lot of skin in the game. Like there's not a lot of industrial interest in these small producers. Your kilns are mostly running on fossil fuels almost exclusively to get those really, really high top temperatures, and for a small thing.
Well, that's the physics of it, because if you need to keep something over 1,000 degrees for more than a day, then the heat loss from that, is enormous. But if the volume that you're having to keep hot is small, then the heat loss per unit volume that you've got is really, really high. Whereas I've worked in an industrial process where I've been next to a kiln which is, 100 meters long, 20, 30 meters wide, where, in a brick factory. Yeah. And there you're firing bricks at over 1,000 degrees, and they've got to be at that temperature for multi-days, and you're producing hundreds of thousands of bricks a day. Like, that is a huge kiln that you go through, and it's an enormous amount of gas that's used. But on the other hand, it is incredibly efficient relative to a tiny kiln in a small studio.
Well, it's like sometimes people think that the machine or some industrial practices then that they're in some way not going to be better. I mean, this isn't strictly sustainability, but I mean, opticians. I went to a fancy pants opticians where they did everything by hand very proudly. And some of the lenses they put on my eyes, I remember they had like fingerprints on them and I couldn't see through them. And I remember mentioning it to the optician and they said, "Oh no, it's fine, don't worry."
It's artisanal.
And, and in the end, I went back to them twice, paid lots of money to see them because I was having migraines and stuff and thought it was the right choice to go and see this fancy pants optician. And in the end, I couldn't afford to go back to them again. Went to Specsavers and they had these great big machines, but the amount of people that they see and the accuracy of the high-tech equipment that they had and everything else meant that they figured out pretty quickly that I'd been given a prescription in the opposite direction. So it had been, goodness. I know, that's why I was having lots of migraines. And I'd been there twice. So yeah, not great. So sometimes these things are actually...
What I was saying last week about where the artificial fibres, things like polyester, acrylic and so on, but those fibres are incredibly efficient, because any time humans want to make something at massive scale, people get really interested in the economics of it and really push the price down. And when you've got a mechanical or chemical process which can be done at scale, it is going to be optimized very, very heavily, and it will, that's the whole point of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, if hand knitting teaches you anything, it is about how important the Industrial Revolution was for textiles manufacture, because if you have to knit all your clothes, it takes an awful lot of work out of the economy. And once you can do that mechanically, you get a huge economy boost from the productivity. So it shouldn't be a surprise that anything that's 100% mechanical is going to be massily more efficient.
Yeah. But I mean, suppose you could be thinking, oh, well, I can never support my local ceramic potter. How could I not? The thing is, if you purchase something from your local ceramic person and that is something that you love and you use all the time and you use that, and it means that you aren't going to be buying the 5, 6, 7 mugs from Tesco. If it's displacing that, then maybe it is worth you getting that one ceramic thing. That's what we did for our wedding, actually. We didn't have a registry at a shop or something. We went to a specific ceramic person, a maker, Sondergaard, Lars. Really amazing Danish-British. She's lived here for a long time and makes the most beautiful ceramics and pottery. I mean, I didn't even know about this environmental bonkers, wow, it's like 4 or 5 times more impactful than buying something mass produced. I didn't know that at the time, but the way that I've been able to rationalize it since seeing that is that It was an intentional choice. We very deliberately decided this is going to be the crockery that we use every day. I had my breakfast off it this morning. So everyone like chipped into a pot, and then we bought the plates and bowls of our dreams, and we use them all the time, and they're gorgeous.
Yeah, that's such an important point, because the other option there is, particularly for, a young couple, you go to IKEA and buy the cheap plates. But what happens then is a few break 5-10 years down the road, and you just think, well, I'm just going to get rid of that set and buy another one. And then what happens is you might be buying a set 5 times over lifetime, whereas you probably won't do that. You say it's a forever set, you might have 1 or 2 sets then over a lifetime instead. So that's the difference really in, it's both a combination of intentionality and also the amount of care that you put into something, and the amount of like how much you value it. And it's not just the financial value, it's also the the value you imbue just from the emotional side.
Well, it's the almost being a custodian of an item, actually, because the thing is, when we got this new fancy crockery, one of the considerations was, okay, well, what do we do with our set from before? And the set that we had from before was the one that I bought when I went to university. Then in terms of being custodians of it, we had some friends who were just kind of setting up house around that time. And I said, look, would you like this set? I've had it for like 10 years, but it's still, none of them are chipped. They're great. And so then they took the set of plates. And I mean, you can't always, there are lots of times when I'm just like, it's going to end up in landfill anyway. I just need to chuck it to get it out of my brain space, minimalism. But sometimes you do have that opportunity to actually hand on an item and be intentional about it. And that can be a good thing.
I've got a couple of stories here. I'm going straight into fibre. There was a story I saw on through Reddit over the weekend where someone had requested a jumper. I think it was their sister-in-law, who was a knitter, had knitted the item for them. So they'd said, when you make me this jumper, I want to choose the colours. And they declined that offer and instead just knitted it in beige and then given it to them. And then this person received it and then wouldn't wear it because it wasn't their colours and it wasn't what they wanted. So then eventually decided to dye it themselves and made it green, wore the jumper, and then the person said, oh, that looks just like the jumper I knitted for you. They said, oh, yes, I dyed it green because I didn't like beige and I was never going to wear it. Huge argument ensues. I mean, this is where no one's a winner out of this, right? Because the knitter was super upset because it was Malabrigo yarn. They'd saved it. It was a special thing for them because they had chosen the yarn, but the recipient couldn't wear that, wasn't going to wear that colour, and so that wasn't it wasn't going to be an item. Whereas then dyeing it green for them makes it into an item they were going to keep.
Where do you sit on that?
I mean, there are mistakes at every single point in that for me, and so I think both parties have there are issues with what both parties did on that, but I think you can't come down and say that either one of them was to blame for then the ensuing disagreement. Personally, what I love doing is I love if I'm going to knit something for someone else, I always talk to them about fibre choices. Yeah. Both colours and the fibre that something's made of, because that's such a big reason for making something for someone is to get that right. So I would have taken a different choice there, but I also understand I wanted to make it for you, and so I wanted to choose the fibre that I think worked. But I think if you do that, you do run the risk that it doesn't work for someone. They decide they don't like it.
I mean, at some point you want to have a gift knitting episode consideration, but my instinct is I'd rather the item get used. And although I acknowledge that there are problems and mistakes along the way, actually, I think maybe I'd be more upset if there was like colour work in it or something, like that had taken a bit more time. But if it's a plain coloured jumper and someone says, oh, actually, yeah, I dyed it because I wasn't going to wear it and I really appreciated that you made this thing for me, but I wanted to wear it and so I dyed it a colour.
It's a tricky one.
It's a tricky one.
It's one of those things where I think no one comes out of a winner. I'm also thinking about, last week I briefly mentioned a jumper, so me and my mum, I went around to see my mum for Mother's Day, and we were reminiscing about my grandmother, my mum's mum. She was a knitter, and we decided to go up into the loft and pull out some boxes of old clothing to have a look for stuff that my grandmother had knitted. And we found this old jumper, which I pulled it out. I reckon it's about big enough for a 6-year-old or so. So we could
really nice.
we could very quickly identify size-wise. And I said, I don't think I ever wore this. Like, as soon as I touched it, I said, I don't think I ever wore this. And my mum said, well, you must have done. And I said, it must have bypassed me. Maybe, so I have a cousin on that side. He's a year and a half older than me. It could have been made for him. And then maybe my brother wore it. I'm absolutely certain I never wore it. And my mum was like, why is that? And the reason is that as soon as I touched it, I know that is not a wool I could tolerate being anywhere near me. It is a very rough, non-superwash yarn, and I have incredibly sensitive skin to wool. And it's not that I'm not allergic to it at all, to be really clear, but I'm very, that roughness and sharpness that people feel when they talk about wool being itchy, that is me on steroids. And so when that jumper, when I touched it, I was like, I could just feel my childish self. There is absolutely no way. So then we went to all the photos because we know the size of child that it looks like it's for. We're trying to find a photo of me in it. And as of time of recording, we have not found that photo. But we went through 86, 87, 88 and 89 photos and haven't found it. Mind you, we also haven't found it on my brother or sister, and it is stained. So it's obviously, it obviously did get used. But yeah, that is it's very rough one. It's sitting right next to, right now, I'm looking at it over there, and it's sitting right next to a superwash yarn scarf that I've made myself recently, which I could wrap myself up in all day because it is
soft and cozy.
Soft and cozy. But people, when they think about sustainability, people get riled about superwash yarn.
Yeah. So this is something where you mentioned you wanted to talk about this, and I've kind of left, inform me, educate me, learn me. Because
these are all my buzzwords.
I've watched videos about this in the past. I've got this vague sense of like, oh yeah, some people get worried about that there are harsh chemicals involved in the process of dyeing. I'm very much one of these people that like, water's a chemical. Like, I'm not meaning it in that flippant sense, but
exactly.
You know,
water is a chemical, and also every bit of wool you buy has been processed. Yes. You cannot take wool off a sheep and turn it straight into a jumper because it will smell of sheep poo and it will have grass in it. Like, and there are all sorts of reasons.
And ticks.
Yeah, you have to treat it. So wool goes through an extensive process of treatment before it becomes the yarn that you knit with. Some of that processing is relatively light, some of it's heavier, but it does need, at least it also needs some form of washing. You pull out the fibres that you want to knit with and the fibres you don't want to knit with. So short fibres are taken out during that process because you generally want to knit and spin with long fibres, and the longer fibres you get from sheep become higher value, and the longest fibres are the most premium wool that you can buy. But that's one of the reasons why merino sheep is known for like high quality, is because it produces some of the longer wool fibers. It's not the longest. Rambui, is it? I think
Rambui is a type of
it's Rambui. I can't. I'm gonna
sorry, I'm having a Real Housewives moment. For anyone who watches Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, Heather Gay has this lovely story about being young and dating and having Drambuie. And that is not what you're talking about. And I'm so sorry. I'm going to take this other little piece of my medication now, just so that I can try and bring some focus back into it.
Also, I was trying to remember sheep breeds, and I'm not going to quickly be able to do it. So there is some treatment involved in all wool. And like one of the things that makes fibre soft is by having these very long strands, because it means there are fewer ends. Because if you double the strand length, you have half the number of ends that you have to have, and ends are spiky, and that's one of the things that makes wool itchy. The other thing that makes wool itchy is the surface of the wool fibre itself, and the wool fibre is covered in these kind of scales, and they add a lot of structure and texture to the outside of a wool fibre. They don't exist on all wools. So alpaca wool, for example, doesn't have them, and all sorts of other animals don't. But sheep wool, that lends a lot of structure which catches on other wool fibres, and that's what also helps give structure to colour work when you knit colour work. And it's why, Shetland sheep are brilliant for colour work knitting as well. That works beautifully because the fibres just mat together very quickly and they felt. But those scales also add roughness to the fibre. And some people will say, oh, well, you can just condition it and all the rest of it. And, but ultimately, people with very sensitive skin can still feel that. Superwash was one treatment of wool. That's how superwash started, because someone came up with a process for processing wool and processing the wool fibre so that those scales were softened. There are now a number of different processes which all get called superwash. And the reason it's superwash is because it also, the reason it's important is because you can throw superwash in the washing machine and it's not going to shrink.
Didn't it have origins with army uniforms?
I don't know about that.
Okay. I'll have to check that. But yeah, it was led by industrial processes. And I think the US Army had these wool uniforms and they weren't really machine washable. So you had widespread machine washing becoming a thing and you couldn't put garments in a machine. So then you've got to design the things that make it possible to machine wash something without it shrinking.
And this comes back to an argument for sustainability and superwash, because superwash, I think, makes garments much more sustainable because they make them more approachable and it makes wool a more attractive fibre to knit with, because you don't have to be so very careful with not felting it and shrinking it. Ultimately, there are a couple of different things that happen, but the scales on the outside of a wool fibre are either eaten away by a chemical process and or they are filled in, some of the gaps are filled in with a resin. Now, this is where superwash gets a really bad name by people that want to dig into it, because chlorine is used in one of the processes where the scales are softened and the edges are they're not completely removed, but it's kind of like it's like if you took sandpaper to it on a really big scale. They're kind of sanded down.
Exfoliation.
Exactly. And the resin that's applied technically is a polymer and therefore is called a plastic and therefore gets accused of being a contributor to microplastics and all the rest of it. The quantities used of these chemicals are really, really small, and I can't quite use the word insignificant, because obviously they have significance at scale when you're talking about tons and tons of wool production, but they are nothing like as significant as the much bigger choices you take around whether you are going to make yourself a garment or buy one from a shop. They're not as significant as throwing a garment away because you're not, you're buying this year's fashion version. So, you can't say they're not significant, because they are significant choices. Just people blow them wildly out of proportion and want to take the soundbite that, oh, chlorine's used in the process or plastics used in superwash yarn. It's just not the case. The amount of resin that you have left in a superwash yarn is way less than 1% of the overall weight. And also, it is embedded within the fibre. It becomes part of the fibre. So it is a processed fibre, but I think it's a processing which makes that fibre, for me, certainly it makes it much more sustainable, because I'm much more likely to use it and wear it for a really long term.
I think it's also like when people hear about processes like this and they hear chlorine and polymers, people can think that that's a negative. They hear chemical processing and think that's bad. Yeah. And that's in some way it's not safe. And I often hear this conversation come up around superwash in relation to children's knitting for babies and knitting for children. A friend recently asked me, actually, can you tell me more about superwash, because I've heard that you shouldn't use it for children's things. I was like, if you knit something for a tired parent who has a baby that is messy and pukes on everything, you kind of want that to be machine washable.
100%. It is utterly unsustainable to knit for a child, I would argue, in pure wool.
Yeah.
Because unless you've got, some superhuman parent.
And also scratchy.
Totally. Like that jumper over there, which I'm pretty sure I never wore.
I remember kind of early on in my knitting journey, it's called Cotton Wool. It's a Rowan one, and I got it in 2 really lovely colours and knitted up quite a few things with it. And when I was looking at reviews or bits and bobs on Ravelry, one of the criticisms was that it was marketed as a baby yarn, a lot of the patterns were for baby knits, but it wasn't machine washable. And there was a lot of criticisms that were like, I just don't think it's not really fair to market this as a baby yarn and then not make it machine washable. That was one of the first times where I really thought about this and realized like, oh yeah, actually placing a sort of a safety pressure on people that is actually quite often rooted in misinformation about like, chlorine, that's bad. Like things are bad contextually.
I mean, absolutely. Like chlorine, most people are happy swimming in a chlorinated swimming pool, and you will get some chlorine into your system from that. You will naturally just swallow a little bit of water that has a little bit of chlorine in it. Most drinking water has a microscopic amount of chlorine in it, but it exists. Yet chlorine was also used in the First World War as one of the first ever gases as a weapon. And because in a pure concentrated form, obviously it's lethal. That's what really annoys me about when people want to take the soundbite that, there's chlorine used in the process of creating superwash. Because, yes, there is. But do you know what? Also, water is lethal. In high doses of water, it is lethal to every human. Like, go and drink 20 litres of water, and I'm afraid that will be the end of you.
Hyperhydration.
Yeah. So, it really winds me up. And I get very upset as well because I think that one of the great things about superwash is it makes wool more approachable for more people. It expands the total market that wool can appeal to. I don't think I would knit as much as I do if I didn't have access to superwash yarn because my fibre choices would be more limited. And I think superwash yarn helps me. I also love the fact that superwash yarn creates another colour palette to work with because it kind of descales the outside of the fibre. It also allows dye to strike the fibre in a different way. So if you look at like a big producer like Malabrigo, for example, which everyone here knows I'm a big Malabrigo fan, but they have superwash and non-superwash bases, and you can see the same colour where they'll call it the same colour, and you'll see that it will strike those bases in a slightly different way. It has a different appearance. And I also love that because it adds depth to the colour palette that you get to choose from as a crafter. I was going to say fibre artist, but that's a whole other... that's a side debate we're not having in this episode. But I appreciate that, and I think it's really important. So I there we go. I said it. Have I made it clear enough? Superwash, I'm a fan.
I suppose when people do have concerns about these things, it comes back around to that idea of like, we don't almost have the intel, like somewhere where I could kind of get on board with like, okay, questions. The environmental impact of these things. So we've talked about like the toxicity, the safety, all that kind of stuff. The actual environmental impact of this, of small independent dyers using these chemicals, where those chemicals then go, if they go into water systems, what happens on an industrial scale, if something's made and they don't follow the proper procedures for disposing of the waste. Those are real questions. And I think especially it comes back around to this idea of we don't have enough answers as individual hand makers in craft about what is the environmental impact of our single skein of yarn, or at least if you do have any information on this, then please send it my way because I couldn't find any, what's it called? The life cycle analysis. I couldn't find any LCA studies on small scale hand knitting, hand crochet stuff.
You're absolutely right. There is a danger. There are chemicals used in the processes, and there is a danger where there's lack of regulation or there's lack of policing that people just dump waste chemicals into river water or whatever.
Even where there are regulations, if the worst case scenario is that a big multinational company is going to get, slapped on the wrist and given a big fine that they can pay and is inconsequential in the large scale of their business, then is it really making a difference? So I think it's right that if you have concerns about this, like they're not completely misplaced is what I want to say. Like I don't just want to rubbish it because we don't have all the information. So in that sense, I think just more general compassion and like...
you know what? I'm also realising, Georgia, the hypocrisy of what I'm saying, because I think last week I was talking about how there was value to animal rights activists pushing the cause further than the regulations would necessarily allow. And maybe that is an important point for superwash as well. That, that actually, how do you ensure? I mean, I would love that there's an international standard that people could self-certify against or certify against to demonstrate.
But standards
like closed loop for chemicals and so on, that stuff doesn't go to wastewater. So.
There are so many differences and discrepancies between different standards. I mean, skincare is an interesting one. I don't want to get too far off piste, don't worry. But when companies launch some skincare in one part of the world and then other parts of the world, there are certain ingredients that are legal in one place and not legal in another.
Oh, yeah. And
it's not always just because like one place is more safe than the other. For example, SPF. Biore have a great SPF. They brought it to the American market from the Asian formulation, and they had to reformulate it. I think looking into it from what I could glean at the time on a consumer level of wanting to understand, why is it a different formulation here versus there? I couldn't actually find any information that was saying, oh, well, it's because of XYZ ingredient aren't safe. It's just that there were different formulation expectations between those two different places.
There was having worked in health supplements, so I was chief executive of a health supplements business for many, many, many years. There was a change in regulation about ingredients which came in to Europe, but after we had exited, the Brexit vote. But we took a conscious decision that the UK would probably catch up with that regulation, and so started reformulating on that basis. Now, it was a small component of a dye in the outside of a capsule. It was in France that it was banned first, and then it became an EU-wide thing. But, you pick up that it was a nuance. Absolutely, it's fine in the US, and, the regulations allow it. It's the same thing. Again, when Brexit happened, everyone worried that we were going to get chlorinated chicken from the US because of different standards.
Oh, I remember, this is reminding me about when I was a child and Super Size Me came out, the documentary about McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of the things that were referred to in the documentary were like not legal practices in the UK. So British McDonald's did not, at least from my understanding, British McDonald's did not operate on the same standards. They had very different practices, different making. But then people watching the documentary, it was aired on Channel 4, kind of almost in the aftermath. The British McDonald's, maybe you remember this, started on this like advertising front of like really trying to emphasize that like, no, it's 100% British potatoes and it's 100% British beef. We don't have a lot of the same farming practices, and like there's a lot of things you can do to animals in America for consumption that you can't do in the UK. And so just by nature of those standards being different, a lot of the things in Super Size Me were not relevant to the UK, and yet it still really impacted the sort of public perception of McDonald's.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, because I don't think anyone came away from that thinking, oh, do you know what? I'm going to have McDonald's for dinner.
No.
It wasn't a flattering documentary.
Yeah. I'm it's all nuanced. I think that's what we're coming back round to. It's all very nuanced.
It is nuanced. If only we were experts in the field, then.
Maybe we could give you more certainty. We are just consumers. We're
just consumers. We're just consumers having a chat.
Yes.
And our audience is choosing to listen to us or not. Who knows? I mean, I've switched off at this point. When I was preparing for this episode, I was thinking, or pair of episodes, I was trying to look at wool pricing and the demand for wool overall in clothing, and looking for the statistics of how and when wool declined and the pricing of that. My hypothesis started out that the reason for the decline in pricing of wool was largely that it was pushed down by the abundant availability of petrochemical-based fibres being available. Because they're made by industrial processes, they become very, very cheap, and that forces the price of wool down because wool is a minority of the market. In the 60s, it was 10% of the market. Now it's 1% of the market. In an economy where you've got 50% of the market being made up of artificial fibres, which is the place it is now, that dominates the price that you can get for wool. Because if you can get something very cheap, why are you going to pay twice or three times over to have something made out of wool? Particularly if consumers don't understand the benefits of wool. But I was really interested in how and when that pricing change happened. And I came across what I found to be a fascinating case study, which is that the Australian market in the 70s, the Australian government wanted to help protect and grow the wool market for Australian farmers. So Australia has been at as much as 25% of the global market for wool production. That's a lot of wool that came out of Australia. But it's also a fragile industry because when you've, like any commodity, prices go up and down from time to time. Farmers always struggle where prices change over time because you have to commit to your investment, not knowing the price you're going to get out when you come to get the dividend. Now, for a field, you're going to seed a field, and then within months you're going to hopefully see your crop come out. With sheep, you have to choose how many sheep you're going to farm, and then that is a commitment you're making over. If you're making that farm for sheep wool, that's a multi-year commitment. So you're expecting that dividend to be paid back over a long time for the investment that you're, when you're buying the land and investing in the breeding stock. The Australian government wanted to provide more certainty and surety for farmers who were really struggling to get a fair price for wool. And so they created a guarantee system. And this rings alarm bells for economists these days, because it's fraught with danger. But what they agreed is if the price for wool in the market ever went below a certain price point, the Australian government would always guarantee that they would buy the wool at that price.
This feels weird.
Well, it has happened from time to time. And, it kind of guarantees that the farmers are always going to get a minimum price for wool. Mm-hmm. What happened is there was then great investment in wool during the 80s. There was a huge increase in demand. And so prices were going up and up for wool. Australian farmers were producing more wool. And the overall economy for that did really, really well. But then there was a change in demand and the demand went down. So the price had to go down. But the Australian government had this guarantee scheme in place. Relatively, for a small change in price paid for wool, there was a significant change in demand, but a huge amount of wool fell under the threshold of the price that the government would pay for it. So the government ended up buying under contract millions and millions of kilos of wool.
Wow.
And ended up with a stockpile of wool, which was equivalent to about a quarter of the global supply, about a year's worth of Australian wool. So that's just because of a small change in the supply. So the government was then holding on to, I think it's about 4 million bales of wool in 1991.
I hate this for Australia, but I love this story. This is crazy.
It's like the tulip crisis in the Netherlands in the 1800s, like how to ruin an economy with something like relatively simple, and it's always economics that gets in the way of it. But so that was then the problem. Then the Australian government owned a year's worth of supply of wool. That the problem you've got then, all of a sudden, all of the wool, you can think, well, it's only a quarter of the global supply for a year, but that is enough to have a really big impact on the price of wool. And so the government had to offload this wool, but they couldn't do it immediately because if they tried to sell it onto the international market, the government obviously makes a huge loss on that. They can't afford to do that quickly. Also, if they do that, they bankrupt Australian farmers. So they own all this wool that no one wants and is super high valued. So the Australian government has to unwind that position.
Unwind.
Spin back on it. And they do so through the 90s, but it causes, some people point to that as one of the significant moments in the pricing of wool. Now, I think the background economics to wool wool was in decline anyway, but that was an additional shock to the system. I don't know. That was new to me. So much in knitting and wool is new to me, but I was that tickled me because that's a good economic story of potential financial collapse. But also Australia's economy moved on from that point where wool became much less significant, and obviously one of the big successes for Australia through the 90s and 2000s has been mining industry and then obviously more tech coming online. But that's I find that fascinating that and the numbers involved as well.
You do realise I will be asking you for sources on this.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Thank you for enriching my day.
Well, there we go.
Wow. I have so many thoughts. I'm giddy with learning, but also that's tragic, but also why do these stories...
but it happens all the time, right? And in farming, there are loads of practices internationally. It is a problem for developing economies anywhere that farmers end up being paid less over time because you get super farms, which are able to farm at scale, and therefore you're not able to, smaller farmers, you're not able to keep up with the pricing. You have supermarkets forcing prices down. And what happens is often governments step in to just prop up an industry slightly, which is important, particularly also for food security, if we're talking about food farming, because it's a national issue that you want to be able to produce and secure your own food. You also have an enormous industry that you just don't want to go under. Like governments prop up the auto industry and car industry. There are all sorts of industries that governments choose to just backstop from time to time. Perfectly reasonable policy decision, but then it's just fascinating for me that it hits a turning point.
Quarter of the world's supply of wool owned by the Australian government.
I think it's a quarter of the years. Now, the place I might have got that mixed up is it may be today's total. I'm worried that I'm suddenly conflating like today's total wool production versus like what was the total wool production in 1991. But the numbers aren't going to be a long way off, and it's a colossal amount of wool.
Well, you've been transparent about that, and once you provide your sources, you've got nothing to worry about. Sorry, that sounded way more threatening than I'd intended it to.
No, I think it's perfectly reasonable, the level of threat. I mean,
people make mistakes. Like I the other week, I talked about India and craft and being the largest employer in India, or the largest employing sector. And then I was looking that up and saw something that said it was actually the second largest employer. So not the largest. I am coming now to issue that correction to say that people make mistakes.
Should we have an errata episode at one point as well?
Maybe, yeah, we should. That would be fun.
In true academic style, that's what we need to call it, errata.
That's an amazing story. Thank you so much for telling us that.
I think it's time for your repairability.
Well, repairability, I mean, this other consideration with sustainability and intention. When you buy something, thinking about the repairability of the item, and increasingly when most of our sort of consuming economy is built to ensure that people keep buying stuff, less and less things are made with the capacity to be repaired. I don't know, sometimes it could even feel deliberate. You could look at some tech when it's deliberately made in this sort of like fused way, where it's all really glued and welded together, so you can't get in it. And if you do, then it invalidates your warranty or whatever else. You can't repair things. You end up going back to the seller and you buy a new one. Mm-hmm. And that is tragic for when we think about sustainability. And so one of the really important things about thinking about the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, all that kind of stuff, is actually considering, okay, how can we design something and make something differently so that it will extend its long-term life, and that would massively reduce its carbon, because it's not just about getting something that is well made in the first place, but is it well made in a way that will facilitate repair? We often will think of in textiles visible mending. I love that visible mending is becoming like a thing where people are almost proudly, deliberately showing that they've mended something in a bright way. I just got some of my summer clothes out and I found one of my jumpers where I did this big visible mend on it, and it feels really nice. It feels like a cool.
I knitted a hat for my dad, and he says that he has got no idea how these holes appeared in it, and that it, for me, it absolutely looks like moth damage. He's assuring me it isn't, because I think he knows that he'd never get anything knitted again if there were moths. But yeah, I playfully mended that with all sorts of different colours and textures, and like these I-cords that came off and reattached. I love just playing with that.
Yeah. There was a pair of jeans that I'd bought. This was in 2018, I think. Mm-hmm. The options and choice in the UK was still not very good for me then. And I found like just the perfect pair of jeans in American Eagle when I was visiting for Christmas. And I wore them until all the seams were snapping. And I kept doing loads of visible repairs on them, like really lovely abstract, big, bold shapes. And then the day that they finally gave out, I was in the kitchen and I was waiting for someone to come and fix the internet, actually. And just before Dima went out the door to work, I was leaning up to get something, and I hadn't even realised the whole of the back seam right down my bum had completely split. And I didn't feel it. Like, I didn't even notice because it's like a nice light pair of jeans, not least because I'd worn them for bloody years at that point. And so thankfully, Dima saw this before I had the broadband guy come. And I would have just been like, hi, yeah, do you want a cup of tea? And then turning around and just had this, my entire bottom was exposed. And that was the point at which it was like, can't really sew these up anymore. And the next time I went to the US, I bought 2 pairs of them and I still wear them. They're my 2 pairs of jeans.
I've got a story for you here. Oh my goodness, I don't know whether to share this. I'm going to share this story with you, Georgia, and then we're going to work out whether or not it's going to get shared afterwards.
Okay.
When I was a consultant as a young lad in my 20s, there was a time where exactly the same thing. I was working in a factory. So my job as a consultant, I was a production engineering consultant. My job was to go into factories and help them produce more stuff.
Shame.
Hey, look, it was an interesting mix of stuff. Like I worked in ceramics factories, I worked in ice cream factories, I worked in bread factories as well.
Wow.
So I did all sorts of stuff. One of these places, once we had a client meeting with the chief executive, and so I was getting ready to go out and have a chat, and I bent over to change my shoes going from one environment into another, and exactly that same thing happened. So my trousers ripped from the very, exactly where you're talking about, like all through the seat. That just came completely undone. And I'm standing there and I've got a white coat on, but I have to take it off to go to the next place on. So at that point, I put my shoes back on to go back into the environment where I can go back to my office. I lock the door. I take my trousers around my ankles and I staple up the seat of the trousers. I pull the trousers back up. And then I go to the meeting with the chief executive and I sit with staples in my bottom.
That's incredible.
And then obviously the meeting finished and I got off site relatively quickly. And I'm afraid my mending skills were a stapler at that point, not anything more.
Really does demonstrate the importance of textile repairability.
I don't know if I would have had time. Like, I was pushed for time. I'm quite proud of being able to, on the fly, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. Like, you engineered yourself out of that one.
Yeah, that was, and yeah. I was.
Especially with a suit, it would be hard to do a repair. You wouldn't necessarily want like a visible mend if it was all the way up the seat of the trousers.
Yeah,
so I'm not accusing you of that.
It wasn't fancy suit. Like they had to look like nice trousers, but also like these were, in a way, it was like he had to be practical because we were around.
Yeah, I get you.
Machinery.
This is making me think of my dad. You know, he's a retired design technology teacher. Now paints spoons in a cutlery factory, and he's on the go. He's doing a lot of woodwork and metal and pottering about with the chickens and stuff. And for years and years and years, he's worn like American style workwear, like Dickies jeans and stuff like that, and like Filson jacket, like the brown one. And then in the last couple of years, that's become like trendy streetwear.
Yeah.
And everyone to me now looks like my father. Because it's so weird. Like, I'll be walking down the street, they're wearing Dickies, and that's my dad's jacket that he's always worn. And it's so bizarre to me that that's become like the trendy thing. And you see it in the windows of these fancy trainer shops and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, you're dressed like my dad, my sort of country dad, who he goes to the supermarket with a wicker basket.
Amazing.
I know, he's a glorious man. He's coming to visit soon in Cambridge, and he asked ahead of the visit, he said, "Do I need smart clothes or can I come as myself?" Oh. And he meant, can he wear his dungarees the whole time?
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So I don't know, making sustainable intentional choices is good, and it can show up in all kinds of ways. And I'm sorry that you had to staple your bum back together. My dad doesn't have to do that in his Dickies jeans. That was the point of me bringing up my dad's thing. Repairability. Yes. This weekend, I realized my Kobo e-reader has broken. Mm-hmm. When I bought it, was thinking, I've been wondering about an e-reader for a long time. I do a lot of reading. I find it like being able to customize the font of things is really helpful for my dyslexia. Finally decided to buy this e-reader. I went with a Kobo because one of the big reasons was because it had relative to other e-readers, had a high a repairability score, and also is open source. So the books weren't going to be tied into Kindle or Amazon.
Their ecosystem,
Yeah. So you could download the books as an EPUB that wasn't locked in. Yeah, it was 6 out of 10 for the repairability score relative to, I think, a score of like 2 for a Paperwhite Kindle. Realised at some point last week, I think I'm very new to having these kinds of like fancy e-readery devices, and I totally dropped it at some point and then looked at it and there's lines down the screen. And it's my fault for not being careful enough with it, but I'm going to need to repair it. Straight away, I knew, at least there's that option. I don't even have to send it away. I can literally buy an authorized good part that I can fix at home, because that was something they set up with iFixit. So
now you've got a great reason to go out to Kobo and say, hey, do you want to sponsor our podcast?
I suppose, yeah. Love Kobo.
But I say to everyone I ever make anything knitted for that it is 100% repairable. And as long as I live, I will repair it because I think it's important. And also, like if it's something you're proud of, like things are basically infinitely repairable if they're knitted, or I guess crocheted. I presume it's you can repair crochet like you can repair knitting.
On a recent video of mine, someone put something out about when you do mend socks, make sure that you use a matching composite yarn, because if you don't, the socks could just like completely shrink and go AWOL when you do the repair on them. And she said she'd been burned by that a few times. So I'm sorry, I don't know who the name of the person it was. I tend to save back a little bit of yarn when I knit socks and then would repair it with that one. But I hadn't actually considered that on a small item like that, you could really pucker it up if the whole thing was in a superwash and then suddenly you put like a little bit of shrunken wool on it or something.
I feel like you could always cut the repair out and repair it again.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it's just to save you the irk of it the first time.
My vibe would be to do it, screw it up, learn from it, and do it again.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But then maybe that's because you're a tinkerer.
Which brings us on to a topic which we absolutely don't have time for, Georgia.
No, we don't have time for gender and tinkering, which is another conversation we will have at some point, which basically is that a study in computing showed that female participants had, you're like clutching your fists on your pen going,
Which, I don't think you should go into it, Georgia, because if you start reading it out, we're going to have to discuss it.
Female participants came out with a lower self-efficacy score than male participants when tinkering. And I do wonder sometimes if that could account for why women are sometimes a little bit like, with tech when they need to repair it. And people are like, just get involved, just fix it. So, because when I found out I needed to fix my Kobo, I was like, oh God, can I do that? Should I get Dima to do it? And I was like, I can absolutely put a screen on something. I do fine detailed work all the time. But my instinct was like, can I do this? So that's what I will say. And I will link the study because it's a very cool study and it's on end user debugging in programming. And thank you for that time.
You're very welcome.
I will cut so much of the whisk story. I promise. So much of it will go. It will be like a sentence, maybe more than a sentence, quite a bit more than a sentence, but it will not be 20 minutes. I promise. I'm so sorry.
All right. I'm just,
what are we on?
We're an hour and a half of recording at this point.
You see, I thought that said 57.
No, it's 87 minutes, Georgia. That's why I'm trying to finish this and wrap it up.
Okay. Right then. Okay, well, thank you for listening to the Yarn Library podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode or any of our others, please do send it to your friends. Could you envisage or imagine someone that you know isn't a listener but could enjoy it being a listener?
I mean, once we've got the sustainability stuff about the superwash, there are a few people that I really want to send this to as you have to listen to this and understand how I think about this, because I've tried to make reels about it, but you just don't have the time and space to talk about it on Instagram.
There are some people I want to send the Forever Whisk story to because I think that they personally know of my plight and they will find it entertaining to know that I publicly discussed that.
I also know what I'm getting you for Christmas.
Don't. No, that's really stressful.
Okay, I promise you I will never buy you a whisk. Is that better?
That's so much better. Thank you. Please never buy me a whisk. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Yarn Library podcast. That's where we got to. Thank you for listening to the...
Just calm down, okay?
You've been listening to Yarn Library podcast with Adam Cleveley at Cleveley Knits and me, Georgia Denham at Tula Pearl. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share and subscribe. And if you didn't, shh.